short on this one. There we go. That's the levels I like to see now. Ellis Cinema back. Another dish. How we doing out there? Good, great, grand, and wonderful. Gotta love that theme from Rue Badley. Rue Badley, you can find him on Instagram. Don't forget, this is the one that comes out and snake bites you out of nowhere. Well, Sean, you could edit that out, or you could just stop the music from playing so that the snake bite doesn't come in, right in the mouth. And I don't do that. Editing is for suckers. I don't mean that, guest. I don't mean that at all. There's the snake bite. Wow, 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 wow.
Huh?
Jesus.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, so that's a rough cut. Anyway, how we doing out there? Good, great, grand, and wonderful. As you see on your dial, this is a bit of an odd one, isn't it? Most of you haven't heard of this one, and why? This one should have happened a long time ago, but sometimes I get sidetracked. Sometimes I get sidetracked. But I wanted to do it on a Thursday because, I toss these up as soon as I'm done. So a little throwback Thursday, going back to 93, circa 1962. Going back to 1903 via 1962. Matinee. So I'm just going to be straightforward with you, audience. It's just one from my childhood that I just really love. And I wanted to talk about it because I think in a lot of ways it embodies everything that this show stands for. And as well as my guest in his show, and it stands for, is to just get excited about going to the movies and sharing an experience with others. Not to say that you can't go to a movie by yourself and enjoy yourself and have an experience. Not at all. But this movie, it focuses on a lot of things, which is why it was so hard to get somebody to pick it up, because I feel like the film is two different films. Like, you have what the director Joe Dante wanted it to be, and then you had what the producers said that it had to be, and there and a lot of shit in between. But we're going to get in on that. It's so what is Matinee? Well, it's during the Cuban Missile Crisis off the Florida Keys is the time that we're set in. So the 60s, 1962, and low-budget filmmaker James Woosley, played by John Goodman, who's shadowing his own Alfred Hitchcock. In fact, we really hit that nail right on the nose in the early going. Anyway,
we certainly do.
Yes, we certainly do. And he's debuting his new film, Mant, in one of the theaters. And so what we have is we have a couple of different moods. We have the mood of showing these horror pictures around, a town that is very about family, and yet you have women in showing ankles, and then you also have the threat of missiles being dropped on you, which is why we insert a little actual JFK in this film. So this movie is really, you kind of have the Cuban Missile Crisis and some kids that really, really want to see the new monster movie that Woosley, played by John Goodman, is about to roll out. But before we get into that, I asked my guest, because honestly, I knew that if I got anyone on this podcast, I don't know how familiar with the film they would have been, and actually when I asked Kyle Bruehl of I Know Movies and You Don't, Generation Film, I Know Movies and You Don't, Kyle Bruehl has his own podcast. Motherfucker is strong. I'm telling you what, I listened to a couple of the Westerns, and there's so much that we agree on, and then he just offers me up perspectives that I just, this is why movies are great, and this is why Matinee's great. So Kyle Bruehl, you went, huh? When I asked you about Matinee, you went, who?
Oh yeah.
Because this one, just slightly before your time, right? Just ever so slightly, and it not super popular amongst the cinephile crowd. So when you got that text or that phone call rather, what was your initial thought about coming on the show to do Matinee today?
Well, I mean, when you threw it in my direction, I was really confused because I thought maybe, I was like, wait, do I know this movie? Does this movie even exist? Is Sean having like a stroke or something? And so I remember looking it up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's this little Joe Dante film, and it's a very personal,
super
Joe
personal
Dante film. Yeah, I mean, especially because nobody. I have to get that out of the way. Nobody talks about Joe Dante enough. I have to say,
yes.
He comes out of the same Corman era producing, 70s with John Landis, and he comes with Paul Bartel, and he has this wonderful, quirky, eccentric presentation. I mean, a lot of people, cinephiles would know, say, The Howling, but, you can't take away the guy did Gremlins and The Burbs, and then here you have this little, wonderful little movie that he does that is clearly an ode to what he did as a child, the fears of the culture going around, the escapism of the cinema, that, he probably felt he didn't have a lot of friends. He probably felt more inclined with the artistry of the movies. And whether it was schlocky, whether it was B-movie, like all these terrible, eccentric movies that, I think Frank Zappa had a funny song called Cheapness. And that's how he described these kinds of movies that was just utterly cheap. And that's what it embodies this. And the movie, within the movie, Mant, is like this wonderful ode to that time. And so Joe Dante just comes out of this time, and he learns from Corman, he learns from William Castle, he learns from Russ Meyer, all these schlocky, pushing the boundaries, entertainment-minded people. And Joe Dante is right in line with them. He is the 80s version of these guys.
Yeah, and that's why you are on the show, because I knew, I knew worst case scenario we could geek about Joe Dante, who I feel doesn't get enough love at all, and I think he is a very specific filmmaker, and we have those that we talk about so often and we just don't for whatever reason with Dante. I think the only time, like you said, that Dante's name ever enters into discussion, not even Gremlins, it's always The Howling. Like no one ever mentioned. And I was talking about this with somebody the other day. I don't know where I stand on this. Okay, this is not an official claim. Okay, Kyle, this is not.
Sure,
this is not an official claim. In some ways, I may like Gremlins 2 more than Gremlins 1.
I've heard these arguments.
Yeah.
It's funny. I don't think Joe Dante likes Gremlins 2 more than Gremlins 1.
No, he certainly does not.
Certainly because all of the expectation, because basically they were like, all the studio heads, because Gremlins was such a hit, they're like, we got to do another one. And they started throwing these crazy ideas. I mean, that Key and Peele sketch is brilliant, just deciphering every little thing that they bring up. And it's just so
put it in the movie.
Put it in the movie. And I feel like that's what they were doing to Joe Dante. And I think I'm going to paraphrase a quote from him. He's like, well, I'm going to make another one, but you're not going to like it, is basically how he came about doing that film. I think there's something really unhinged about Gremlins 2. Obviously, it lacks the kind of emotional center and the characterization that the first Gremlins has. That's very super. It's just super fun, and they just took that level, that idea to almost like the speed, like you joked about doing, speed earlier, but like that's like really what it is. It's like a speed version of the new batch is the speed version of Gremlins.
I asked Kyle earlier. All I said in a text was I said, you want to do Speed in a little while? And then after I thought about it, I was like, well, not the movie, the drug. And he was just like, well, as long as we have a room to break shit, which I agree. I mean, that would be a necessity. But yes, I think we should do Speed a little down the line. I just think that's a fun one, and
that's one I grew up with. That one. That was a super fun one.
Yes, dude, one of our more. It's funny because I think it's one of America's better action films, and it was 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago.
I wanted to bring it back because you were saying, why don't people talk about Joe Dante enough? And I'll tell you why. There is a reason. It's because Tim Burton took away all of his flair. It's Tim Burton does the same things generally.
Oh man, I never thought about that.
He's way more popular. I mean, you compare Matinee 2 years earlier to say Mars Attacks. Like, it's very similar. I mean, just the period, the era that they're lampooning or trying to pay homage to, it's very much a similar tactic. And so, I mean, Burton grew up in the same time period as Joe Dante. So, and they're making movies at the same time. Pee-wee's Big Adventure comes out a couple years after The Howling, and The Burbs and Pee-wee's Big Adventure, they have the same kind of tone. They have the same kind of quirky, weird. Beetlejuice even has that similar hinge. So it's interesting that because I think Joe Dante gets forgotten because Tim Burton was so popular,
and that's annoying because he I would say that I like Joe Dante's, and that's hold on, audience.
It's tough. Well, no. I get where you're going because it's tough because I think Tim Burton is great. Well, I mean, up to a certain point in his career, he's great.
Correct.
I even think up to Mars Attacks, he's great. I even Sleepy Hollow has its charm and point to it. But Joe Dante. There's something to be said about the forgotten man. Like here's a guy who's making movies that are equitable. Like Gremlins is a childhood staple of mine. The Burbs is a great rumination on this kind of suburbia and a very great comedic take on it that was pretty incisive, at its time. And, Tim Burton's getting into similar dynamics. They're both following in the lines of, say, David Lynch, who's doing it on a more art house degree. And they're doing it on a more populist and delivered to the people in a very, eclectic, eccentric, angle. And so I think Joe Dante's just the forgotten man in the conversation. And I can tell, I know exactly what you mean when you're going down the road. It's like, I almost want to pioneer him more. I want to say that these movies are just as good, if not better.
So I would say, of course, Tim Burton has a more distinct vision. That's obvious. But dude, I never even thought about Pee-wee and Burbs being kind of the same tonally, and it totally is. It totally is. And I guess at the end of the day, Dante's films are more fun to me, and obviously a lot of Tim Burton's work isn't meant to be fun, it's kind of meant to be dreary, but it's both things, like pioneering him while also being like, he's not a bad filmmaker, at all. Like, in fact, I would think he is a movie lover in the truest sense. Like, some of the stuff that you see within Matinee is universal and will continue to be, where you're just like, oh man, and he makes you long for a time that's so much to love about Matinee. And I think, and I totally think, like, the movie itself, it suffers a lot, but in the most obvious of producer, like, did you happen to, when you watch this, did you disc it? Did you stream it?
I rented it. I rented it on Amazon.
Okay. So
did you do the Shout Factory?
Oh, yeah.
Shout Factory?
Okay. Yeah. Well, because when I saw it was getting released, I was just like, oh, dude, remember Matinee? Because it hadn't had a Blu-ray release up until this point. So I was just like, yes.